Hello everyone, how are you all? ಹೇಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ? I hope you all are doing fine. Make the best use of our videos. Be enthusiastic, be lively, watch the videos carefully and understand the concepts. And meanwhile, if you have any doubts and difficulties, we can solve it after the classes. And what you have to do is, if you won't understand any of the concepts, pause the video, rewind it, then see it once again. Okay. So in the previous class, we had came to the part of gametogenesis. In the gametogenesis, we had came to the first concept called as spermatogenesis, where the sperm is formed in the testis. Similarly, with respect to that of spermatogenesis, the second part that we are going to deal in this class is oogenesis. Now we'll come to the definition of oogenesis. What exactly is oogenesis? Oo refers to ovum, genesis meaning formation. Now let's look at the definition of the oogenesis. The process of formation of ovum in the ovary. The process of formation of ovum in the ovary is said to be oogenesis. The definition of gametogenesis also holds good for the oogenesis. Now look at this. In the oogenesis, what exactly is formed? Ovum is formed. Where it is formed? In the female gonad. Which is the female gonad? Ovary is the female gonad. So this is regarding the part of oogenesis. Now first let's understand what exactly is oogenesis, how exactly the steps will occur. Then later on we'll go to the additional concept of oogenesis. Now during the process of oogenesis, as already we have studied in the spermatogenesis, this also has 3 steps. The first step is phase of multiplication. Phase of multiplication. The second one is phase of growth. Phase of growth. The third one is phase of maturation. Phase of maturation. So we have these 3 steps. Then what exactly is the process of oogenesis? Let's study with a neat representation, schematic representation. So here we have diploid cells. This is called as a oogonia. This oogonia undergoes the phase of mitosis, and this is called as the phase of multiplication, where mitosis will occur, where the oogonial cell multiply or divide by the process of mitosis, where it forms from 2n to 2n cells. Now mitosis, as already we know, it is an equational division where the number of chromosomes remains same. Then how many number of chromosomes are present in the oogonial cell? 46. The same number, 46 and 46 number of chromosomes are present in the daughter cells also. This process is said to be mitosis. We call this as multiplicative because oogonial cell, its number will increase initially. Then one of these will enter into the next phase called as a growth phase. So second one is a phase of growth. This is phase of growth. Now this is called as a primary oocyte. This is called as a primary oocyte. This primary oocyte undergoes a first meiotic division. It gives rise to 2 cells here. This is a first meiotic division. First meiotic division. First meiosis to give rise to 2 cells. And both the cells are haploid. Look at the number of chromosomes. It is diploid, having 46 number of chromosomes. 2 haploid cells. Out of the 2 haploid cells, both have 23 number of chromosomes. But there is a smaller polar body. This is called as the first polar body, and this is called as a secondary oocyte. This is called as secondary oocyte. Now this secondary oocyte is little bit larger because of the dense cytoplasm. The first polar body is little bit smaller with a very less little cytoplasm, and the first polar body, it is also called as a non-functional ovum. This is also called as non-functional ovum. It is functionless. It gets degenerated later on. This secondary oocyte undergoes the second meiotic division. Here we come across a meiosis 2. Second meiotic division to give rise to two more cells. Now one is smaller, other one is larger. Now this is called as a second polar body. This is the second polar body, and this one is called as a ootid, or also termed as a ovum. And this process is called as a phase of maturation. So this is the phase of maturation. Now look at all the three phases here. Phase of multiplication, phase of growth, phase of maturation. Now with respect to the spermatogenesis, what has happened in the spermatogenesis? We can see the same parts with a little difference in the process of oogenesis. Now phase of multiplication means the oogonial cell, we call it as a primordial germ cell also. We also call it as a gamete mother cell. This oogonial cell or oogonia, which is diploid having 46 number of chromosomes, undergoes a mitosis to produce many of the oogonial cell. Now one oogonial cell will enter into the phase of growth where the cell size will increase. The size of the cell gets increased. This cell now it is termed as a primary oocyte. The primary oocyte undergoes a first meiotic division to produce two haploid cells. Look at this. Primary oocyte is diploid having 46 number of chromosomes. It gets reduced to two cells. Both the cells are having haploid number of chromosomes, that is 23 each. But one is smaller, one is larger. The smaller cell is said to be first polar body. The larger cell is said to be secondary oocyte because it is having dense cytoplasm. Now, this secondary oocyte undergoes second meiotic division to produce into one smaller, tiny second polar body, and other one is a ootid, which is also called as a ovum. So this is how the ovum is produced. Now look at the process. Finally, at the end, how many functional ovum or ootid are produced during the process of oogenesis? Only one functional ovum or ootid is produced. Then how many polar bodies are formed? Look at this. Now here we have the first polar body, here we have the second polar body. Now the question comes whether only two polar bodies are formed at the end of oogenesis or three polar bodies. So what is this three? According to some persons, what they say is the first polar body undergoes meiosis 2 and this divides into two more polar bodies, forming finally three polar bodies. But at present we are not clear about this concept whether this first polar body undergoes the meiotic division or no. And hence what we get here, we get in the first meiosis one polar body, in the second meiosis we have second polar body. What is the function of polar body? No, it is functionless. It is not having any function, and hence the polar bodies gets degenerated when it is formed. Then which is the functional egg? Ootid, which is also called as a ovum. This is the functional one during the process of oogenesis. Now the question comes, during the process of spermatogenesis, four functional sperms are produced. During the process of oogenesis, only one functional ovum or ootid is produced and non-functional polar bodies are also formed. And in the spermatogenesis, we don't find any such type of polar bodies. Now there might be a question based on write the difference between spermatogenesis as well as oogenesis. We can basically make the difference between these two. Spermatogenesis, its definition; oogenesis, its definition. End of the spermatogenesis, 4 functional sperms are produced. End of the oogenesis, 1 functional ovum is produced. Spermatogenesis, no primary, no polar bodies are formed. Here polar bodies are formed. So in this way we can write the difference between spermatogenesis as well as the oogenesis also. Okay. Now does the process occurs exactly in the females? Because the process of oogenesis occurs in the female reproductive system, in the ovary. Then what exactly happens in the female reproductive system? So let's study it now. Now in the females, regarding the process of oogenesis, as it is occurring in the ovary, it is not exactly the same that we are going to study here. Practically it is a little bit different. So what is the different? Now during the embryonic development of the female fetus, initially in each ovary there are a couple of million oogonal cells which are added or formed. That means when the female embryo is developing in the womb of the mother, a couple of, that means 2 million oogonia are added in the ovary. How many? 2 million. In each ovary, 2 million oogonia are added at the time of birth or during the embryonic development. So 2 million oogonia are present at the time of birth in the female baby. Now, after birth, no more oogonia are added in the ovary. Keep this in mind. During the birth, 2 million oogonial cells are added in the ovary. After birth, no more oogonia is added. Then next, what happens? During the growth of the baby, when the baby reaches its pubertal phase, puberty meaning sexual maturity, many of the oogonal cells will degenerate. Many of the oogonal cells will degenerate, and only 60,000 to 80,000 oogonia will remain at maturity at pubertal phase. So at puberty, how many oogonia? 60,000 to 80,000 oogonia are present in the ovary of female reproductive system. So look at the number. Then what happens to the rest of the oogonia? The rest of the oogonia gets degenerated during the development of the baby to its adulthood. Okay, say about phase of maturity or phase of puberty. It might be around the age of 10 to 13 years also. During that phase, only 60,000 to 80,000 oogonia will remain. But during its development, what happens? This oogonial cells, it undergoes the process of meiosis to form into primary oocyte. It undergoes the process of meiosis and it enters into the primary oocyte. The primary oocyte, when it undergoes meiosis, the cells gets arrested in that phase only. So when the primary oocyte enters into meiosis, it gets arrested when during the growth of the baby from its childhood to adulthood. Adulthood meaning pubertal phase. The primary oocyte undergoes meiosis and gets temporarily arrested. Then at sexual maturity, what will happen? At sexual maturity, this primary oocyte, it undergoes first meiosis, completes first meiosis to form into secondary oocyte. So secondary oocyte is formed. That means the oogonal cell has completed its first meiotic division. Okay. Then it remains in the secondary oocyte stage only. Now this secondary oocyte, it develops a certain follicular cells over its sides on its surroundings, and then this one gets released from the larger follicle in the ovary, which is called as a Graafian follicle. From the Graafian follicle, suppose if we take this as the Graafian follicle, inside the Graafian follicle, so there is a follicle which is called as a secondary oocyte. The secondary oocyte is present here, which is surrounded by folliculi cells, and this is the Graafian follicle. Regarding the structure of the Graafian follicle, we are going to study it in the next class. In the later classes, you will come across the diagram of the Graafian follicle. Now we are looking at the exact methodology, what happens in the female reproductive system. Now this Graafian follicle may consist of an outer layer called as theca externa, theca interna. Inside it has many cells called as membrana granulosa cells. Now inside this, here we have the secondary oocyte cell. Now this gets released from the Graafian follicle and from the ovary, and the process is said to be ovulation. Now ovulation means a release of egg from the Graafian follicle is termed as a ovulation, and the process occurs exactly on the 14th day of a menstrual cycle. That means the non-functional ovum or egg gets released. We call it as secondary oocyte. Still it is not active completely. It gets released. When it gets released into the from the ovary into the fallopian tube, in the fallopian tube, during fertilization, when the sperm enters into this cell, it completes a second meiosis and forming a functional ovum, and this functional ovum fuses with the sperm and gets fertilized. This is how the process of fertilization occurs. How exactly the process of fertilization occurs? Again, it is the study of the later part. Now, in the process of oogenesis, what we are studying here, how the ovum is formed and where the ovum is formed. Now, we know by the process of oogenesis, ovum is formed. Where it is formed? It is formed in the ovary. But the schematic representation that we study here, this process do not occur at once in a single phase. This is the methodology of understanding, but in practicality, what happens? We have discussed in this part. So second part deals with the practicality, what exactly happens, what really happens in the female reproductive system in the ovary of the females. Okay, now let us have a glance over the oogenesis as well as the second part. Now look at the part of the oogenesis. Oogenesis is the process of formation of ovum from the oogonal cells. Now look at the process here. Oogonia is diploid. It undergoes the process of mitosis to produce into many cells. Now these cells are formed during fetal developmental stages, when the fetus is in embryonic stage or it is present in the womb of the mother. The process will occur. In the womb only, what happens? The mitosis process has occurred, and 2 million, a couple of million oogonia are formed in each ovary. Now, this cell undergoes the phase of growth called as a primary oocyte. Then, after the birth of the baby, 2 million oogonia are there. From the birth of the baby, when it gets to the pubertal phase, 60,000 to 80,000 oogonial cells are present. Rest of the oogonal cells gets degenerated, and what happens to these cells? They undergo the process of meiosis and temporarily get arrested in primary oocyte stage, and that primary oocyte cell gets surrounded by certain folliculi cells, and hence it is also called as a primary folliculi also. And later on it grows in its size. Earlier it will be small, called as primary follicle, secondary follicle, matures into tertiary follicle, and finally into Graafian follicle. Now during this process, what happens? The primary oocyte undergoes first meiosis, and it is present at the secondary oocyte stage. When it's present in the secondary oocyte stage, the follicle gets matured to form into graphene follicle, and this ovum gets released. Ovum meaning egg is released at a secondary oocyte stage only. The process is termed as ovulation. After ovulation, the ovum enters into the fallopian tube. Remember, already we have studied the structure of the female reproductive system. It enters into the fallopian tube. In the fallopian tube, suppose if the sperm enters into this cell, then this secondary oocyte undergoes second meiotic division, and it completes the second meiotic division to form into functional ovum. This ovum gets fertilized with the sperm. So this is regarding the process of oogenesis. So spermatogenesis and oogenesis, almost the process is same. Difference what we find is, at the end of oogenesis we have only one functional ovum. At the end of spermatogenesis we have 4 functional sperms. Okay, and what is the process that occurs in the female ovary? So in this second part we have studied regarding this, and in the next class we will come across the structure of the sperm, structure of the ovum, and this ovum is present inside the graphene follicle. We will come across the structure of the graphene follicle also, and along with the structure of the ovary. So ovary, inside the ovary graphene follicle is present, inside the graphene follicle ovum is present. So that is the later process. So that process will continue in the next class.